It's common to hear people talk about the miracle of birth, even though birth, hatching from eggs, sprouting from seeds, and fission or budding of simple organisms, all occur countless billions of times every day, and with very few exceptions, everything that is born, hatches or sprouts will die. Each one of us has seen death, whether indirectly as fictionally depicted in movies or TV shows, or more directly through deaths of friends, parents, siblings, and/or partners. More rarely, some of us have been or will see death as a result of accidents or armed conflict. Yet we are, in Western society, largely but not entirely shielded from actually witnessing death, due to the rise of something called invisible death, which is to say death that occurs in institutions. In contemporary Western society, only 20 to 25% of deaths occur in the home with family in attendance. This was obviously not the case for the vast bulk of human history, and for most of that history, people had ample opportunity to watch and reflect on death, asking questions like what is it and what does it mean? Did the deceased, or rather their conscious self, go anywhere, or just dissolve into nothingness? If it went somewhere, what is that place? Is it near or far, or does the concept of distance not even apply? These questions have been asked and left unanswered for thousands of years. Now, we do not have the answers to these questions, of course. Perhaps no one does. But let's take a look at some of these, and for some, explore the tentative answers. From things like do all living organisms eventually die, and do animals have any understanding of death? Here we'll look at 5 of the many unanswered questions surrounding death. Before we begin, we do not want this video to depress or sadden you, and we hope by the end, death may even seem a little less scary. After all, it truly is one of the biggest mysteries of all. What is death? One would think that, with all the attention it has gotten for millennia, the answer to this question would be pretty obvious. But like the question, what is life, there is no easy answer. The latter question is really largely academic, since we all know that we are alive. Although the question may grow more immediate and urgent when and if we encounter extraterrestrial life forms that do not resemble life as we know it. But since we are all going to die sooner or later, and by any of a wide variety of means, the question of what death is has a much more immediate existential urgency, and one we can all relate to. Into and throughout the 19th century, and well into the first half of the 20th century, determining if someone was dead seemed fairly simple. Check for a pulse. If there was no pulse, the person was dead. Unfortunately, this wasn't always true. And as many of you probably know, there have been various abnormal non-walking states, such as a coma, which can suppress heartbeat to such a degree that no pulse or even a heartbeat can be detected. As is well known, being buried alive was a common fear in the 18th and 19th centuries, and this certainly happened, although it's impossible to really determine how often. The invention of the electrocardiogram improved matters, but development of methods of resuscitation made it clear that lack of a heartbeat did not signal irreversible death. Brain death, as determined by electrocardiogram, seemed a better indicator, in that it was believed that cells in general, and generally neurons, died after about 5 minutes without oxygen. This has also been proven untrue. It was discovered in the early 2000s that cell death was in fact often caused not by the absence of oxygen, but rather by the sudden reintroduction of oxygen to cells. In fact, cells deprived of oxygen show no signs of death for several hours. More recently, it's been determined that subtle brain activity, undetectable by standard EEG, can continue unsustained and unaided by technological means for extended periods of time. That means there is no moment of death. Death occurs as a gradual process, occurring at different rates for different types of cells, and can take a lot longer than you probably thought. Being kept alive artificially can extend this process for decades. These discoveries have spurred renewed research into better techniques of resuscitation, because many people once thought irretrievably dead can and have been brought back. Does every living organism eventually die? This is impossible to answer for certain, because we cannot watch every individual living thing forever to see if it stays alive. However, the best answers we have, perhaps surprisingly, seems to be no, although this particularly depends on how one defines an individual organism and the means of death. Nothing is invulnerable, and so accidents, predation, and disease can cause the death of any living thing. But what about death from senescence? In other words, death from just wearing out and dying as a result of no longer being viable. No matter how lucky we are in avoiding accidents and disease, we're still going to die, because our biological machinery will eventually wear out. This is at least partially because we age. We contain fewer and fewer stem cells that can differentiate into different types of cells that can replace damaged ones. Asexual reproduction complicates this picture. Many organisms, at least occasionally, reproduce themselves asexually, and some do this as their only means of reproduction. There are many ways to reproduce asexually, the most common being fission, budding, vegetative, and fragmentation. Some of these methods do not involve the death of the original organism. A small, multicellular organism called the hydra, which reproduces by budding, has recently been shown to continually produce pluripotent stem cells, and also produces exact replicas of itself through budding. As far as anyone knows right now, these organisms are immune to death by aging. Some sea jellies can also go through a life cycle whereby they start out as polyps, which is normal, and then progress to the adult stage. But at that point, rather than dying, they regress to becoming polyps again, which then develop into an adult form again. These jellies also continually produce stem cells, and there seems to be no known limit so far as to the number of times they can keep regenerating like this. In other words, they don't die, they just become babies again and start all over. Fission, or mitosis, occurs when one individual organism splits into two exact replicas. In this case, the process can happen indefinitely. Can the original organism be said to have died? Suppose that you were capable of fissioning. If you fissioned, would the original you be dead, even though there were now two of you? If not, would those two yous both be you? Would the you that is your mind and consciousness exist simultaneously in both yous? Many unicellular organisms multiply by fissioning, and in that sense do not die. What the experience would be like for an organism with a conscious mind is impossible to imagine, but it may be that we will someday encounter an extraterrestrial civilization that reproduces this way. Do non-human animals have an understanding of death? Comparative thanatology is not a recognized field of research and really doesn't even exist as such, but an enormous body of research and literature exists in comparative psychology and an intelligence and emotion in non-human animals. The nervous system, including the brain and endocrine system in humans, are not distinctively different from the same systems in non-human vertebrates, especially mammals. Since intelligence, mind, and emotions have their origins in these systems, it's reasonable to think that non-human vertebrae, at least, will experience much of the same internal lives that humans experience, any differences being perhaps in quantity rather than kind. In humans, the only mind and emotion we can directly experience are our own. We can only infer those same attributes in other humans by simple assumption, and also by observation of external behaviours of those other humans. What exactly does an understanding of death require? It requires at least an understanding of the permanent and irreversible cessation of life, whatever it is that animates a living thing. It's not really clear how many humans fully understand or grasp that, and so it's essentially impossible to determine how many non-human vertebrates do. What we do see on occasion is awareness that something has happened to a now dead individual, and that something commands attention. Chimpanzees, macaques, dolphins, whales, and elephants will carry or support or try to revive their dead offspring for days and sometimes weeks. This may simply reflect an inability to grasp death. Elephants will display a fascination for the corpses or skeletons of both herd members, and even unfamiliar elephants, in particular manipulating the tusks. Coco the gorilla, who was taught sign language, had a pet cat she called Allball. Allball was killed by a car, and when Coco was informed of this, She seemed to understand what it meant, and she seemed to grieve. Washu, a chimpanzee who had been taught to sign, had lost 2 infants to miscarriages. When one of her caretakers also suffered a miscarriage, Washu seemed to understand when told, and became very despondent. Birds also seem to display some kind of understanding. Some species of crows will gather around the corpse of a crow and create what is known as a cacophagous aggregation, which simply means a noisy bunch of crows. Why they do this is unknown, but they certainly seem to know that something significant has happened to the dead crow. But none of this is truly evidence of fully understanding death, and even less so is it evidence of understanding mortality, which is a more abstract concept which includes the self. What are near-death experiences? By now, virtually everyone has heard or read about near-death experiences. There are perhaps hundreds of books about them, and many thousands of first or second-hand anecdotes about the experience. We've even done videos on them. The broad outlines of the experience are familiar: a sensation of no longer being in a physical body, the perception of a very bright white light at the end of a long tunnel, often being greeted by either family figures who are deceased, or by anonymous benevolent entities, a feeling of peace and or happiness, confronting or being aware of the presence of some sort of supreme being, sometimes in the guise of a major deity belonging to the person's religion, being sent back because it is not the person's time to die, or very rarely being given a choice. There are other elements that may also be present, but these are among the core experiences. That the experience is real, i.e. is experienced in the mind, is beyond doubt. What it is exactly is much less clear. A major problem with NDEs is like that of UFO sightings. They are irreproducible, and unlike UFO sightings, by their very nature, are never accompanied by videos or photographs, even of dubious quality and origin. The next best thing is for researchers to be present at the moment of NDE, and this has in fact been tried. The most famous effect was the AWARE project, led by Dr. Sam Parnia, that ran from 2008 until 2012. It involved 15 hospitals in the US, the UK, and Austria, and studied the experiences of 2,060 in-hospital patients who had suffered sudden cardiac arrest. Of these, 330 patients survived, and of these, 140 were well enough and willing to participate. Of these 140, only 101 proved able to complete a detailed interview of their experiences, and of these, 9 reported what could be termed NDEs. 2 of these 9 reported experiences of their surroundings while being resuscitated, and 1 of these 2 had visual and auditory experiences, detailed enough to allow corroboration. This was a truly dismal return, but this may have been due to enormous complications resulting from the research design, which required that an NDE be preceded by an out-of-body experience, which may not be characteristic. Still, even one seemingly valid instance is noteworthy, and AWARE 2 is planned. Unfortunately, none of this actually explains what a near-death experience actually is, and especially if they are evidence of the persistence of conscious awareness after biological death. We know NDEs are not the result of hypoxia or oxygen starvation. We know that NDEs are not a result of medication. A naturally occurring substance, DMT, has been postulated as causing NDEs, but there are conflicting data on the matter. We do know that brain function can persist, that can only be detected by extremely sensitive instrumentation. And we know that as brain cells begin to die, they engage in a sudden burst of intense activity, which may indicate some sort of intense subjective experience. This might possibly be the cause of NDEs, or just a physical correlation of them. We simply do not know. Do ghosts exist? And if so, what are they? Many people who are watching this video will have personal stories about encountering what they consider to be ghostly presences. Stories about encountering ghosts, spirits, and paranormal presences have been recorded in all cultures, and it seems very likely that such experiences date back tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, long predating the invention of writing. It's probably safe to assume that the experiences themselves are real. The question is, exactly what is being experienced? Nothing whatsoever is actually known about ghosts, although a great deal is assumed about them. There are various alternative taxonomies or classifications of types of ghosts, but there is no way to assess these, since no undoubted ghosts have ever been contained and examined. Untold numbers of attempts have been made to photograph, record, and otherwise detect ghosts electronically and electromagnetically, but there is no way to determine what has been captured when something is recorded, since none of these devices have been tested on actual ghosts. Personal, subjective experiences of ghosts can sometimes be reproduced with electromagnetic fields, ultrasound, and low-level persistent carbon monoxide. This doesn't prove that these factors account for all ghostly experiences, but rather only that they can mimic some of them. But if real ghosts have ever been filmed, photographed, recorded, or physically felt in any way, we can deduce some few things about them. In particular, if ghosts can appear on film, or be detected in infrared, or slam doors, or move objects, or make sounds when they walk, then they must be physical entities. This is simply because these abilities to interact with physical objects and electromagnetic fields, which are composed of subatomic particles, require that these ghostly presences also possess physicality. Otherwise, they would simply not be detectable. Even being visible requires interaction with the neurons in human retinas. If it's true that some presences are aware of their physical surroundings, including people, and other presences are oblivious to both people and physical structures, it's possible that there may be two types of these presences. However, since we do not know if there is such a thing as a human soul or consciousness that survives physical death, we cannot conclude that some ghostly phenomena are caused by any human element that survives death. And since all human experiences is in fact a product of the brain synthesizing raw external stimuli, we do not know how much of the experience of ghostly presences is rooted in the external world, and how much of it is a creation of the mind. What do you think? And do you have any compelling ghost stories to share? So that's 5 fascinating and mysterious questions and answers about death. We hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.